Thank you. First of all, massive thanks for having me here. It's really, really nice. Julian's been fantastic, and yeah, it's really good. And I noticed how shy everyone is. Like, what's with the front row stuff? So I'm going to talk a lot of nonsense for about 45 minutes and then release you to the bar. But I just thought I'd kind of talk a little bit about my journey and how I got to kind of where I am right now. And I've got so much to learn and so much to do, but I just thought that it may be interesting and hopefully I won't talk too much rubbish. So the reason that I got into portraiture and into photography is I was at Brighton University, and I moved into being an editorial photographer very, very quickly. But during my foundation and during my first, second and third year, I started assisting. And I just cannot tell you enough how helpful that was to me. And I've maintained kind of really close contact with all the people that I did assist, and they've become mentors now. And I just absolutely highly recommend that you get out there if you are interested in photography, and just get some assisting with people whose work you like. Don't end up working for somebody who's just going to treat you like rubbish, whose work you don't even like. So it can be really fun and you can learn quite a lot. So I just wanted to talk about kind of how I divide my time as well, because I work editorially and then I also pursue personal projects. And sometimes it's quite nice because my editorial work feeds into my personal work. And I feel really blessed and really lucky that my job lets me do that. I mean, I have the opportunity to walk up to anyone in the street and ask if I can stare at them for an hour. And if I didn't have a camera, I wouldn't be able to do that and I'd be a weirdo. And I think it's quite nice that I can take my camera and get to form relationships with people and enter people's lives just through what I love doing. So for example, this was a commission from the Guardian weekend. And when I first started getting into editorial photography, the one thing that I'd really learned through assisting was that I'm really lucky to have an opportunity to photograph somebody and have this window of opportunity that was limitless. And there were two avenues that I could take. I could either rock up, I could take my picture, take my money, and I could go, and that was it. Or I could really think creatively, try and do as much research on the person as possible, and really engage with the person that I'm photographing, no matter who they are. And I really hope that I don't lose that, and I really hope that I never get into rhythm of just taking a picture and leaving, because it stops being fun when you do that. So for example, with this commission, it was for the Guardian weekend. It's a small picture just on their experience page. And I enjoyed the commission so much because I had a full day with this guy to talk about his experience, and how he overcame his troubles sort of in former life, how his parents didn't know. And it was an opportunity to really connect with somebody and really form an emotional connection. And I think there's always room for that. And I guess that's kind of like the pinpoint of how I work, is that I really believe in creating an emotional image and something that is, I guess, a result of an experience that I share with that person. And sometimes I get this really weird thing, and it only happens to me sort of 5 times in my life, where I'm looking down the lens, and the person is either looking at me or they're looking at something else. And there's this beautiful moment. And it's a moment that's kind of the only thing that I can describe it as is when an awkward kind of teenage kiss, when you're both kind of standing there going, are they thinking what I'm thinking? And it's kind of this awkward space that you're both part of. And it's a really beautiful kind of sixth sense space that happens, and you just connect, and there's that moment. And it happens quite rarely, but when it does, you feel that connection. And I always feel so grateful that I'm doing that, and I've got photography to enable that moment and that experience. So whilst I was at university, I started becoming really interested in photographing young people. And this resulted from, in our third year, what we had to do was we had to just do one major project for a year. And I completely freaked out and didn't come up with an idea until about the last 3 months. And this idea resulted from me sort of exploring what I was interested in at the time. And one of the things that I was interested in very much was documentary photography. And I decided to go on this 2-week kind of trip in the woods with loads of teenagers that were basically there for a kind of a self-esteem building exercise camp, where they were from pupil referral units, all these kind of emotionally charged young people that were hoping to bond and come out of it. And I went with a kind of negative expectation of the fact that I was going to be in the woods for 2 weeks with a load of boys from the age of 13 to 18, and it could just get really messy. And after like the first week, you know, both my wing mirrors of my car had gone, and I was just like, this is going to be a nightmare. And by the second week, I really saw this transition within the young people and how I was viewing them and how they were viewing each other and how they were emotionally engaging with each other and how they were just developing and kind of coming out of their shells. And I was like, oh, this is quite interesting. And then there was just this moment that was kind of like a eureka moment when I was speaking to the boys, and there was like this little boy, and I think his name was like Jack or something like that. And he was really short, and he had like a hoodie, and he was just really like, you know, rude boy. And I was like, hey, Jack, so like, what do you want to be, you know? Like, do you want to be kind of like, what do you want to do with your life? And he was like, I want to be in musicals, man. Like, musicals, just amazing. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, man, like Oliver and that shit, amazing. And I was like, oh my God, my perception of you was just, I did not expect that at all. And it really made me think about kind of like how I was viewing these people that I was photographing and how I had this kind of like perception in my mind of exactly who they were. And it really made me think about kind of like my relationship with people as a photographer and kind of like how I need to be really open and be really kind of like vulnerable myself in order to form that connection. And I need to present people fairly. And I think that one thing that's a burden as a photographer is the fact that any image you guys create or anything that you present to people, any form of artwork, is going to be interpreted, and we hold responsibility for that. So I hope that what I can do is just make people think with what I do and form their own opinions. So I did a body of work for my final major, which was on young people. And I worked with young people from lots of different backgrounds, pupil referral units, youth offending teams, private schools, boarding schools, everywhere. And then the project was called The Untitled, and each image was of a young person in an anonymous background, and it was titled just with their name. So like, this is Mike. You have no idea to his background, and you just accept Mike as he is, as a person. Whilst I was photographing that, I noticed that a lot of the young people were in relationships. And I thought it was really fun, and I thought this is a really great opportunity for me to do something, I don't know, like kind of, you know, where I can really get access to these people's lives and be part of their world and hopefully share that. And I thought it was also a unifying theme, because the problem is that when you do a project, it can become quite self-indulgent. And you can, for example, if it's something family related, or if you have like a real interest in skateboarding and you go and do a project on skateboarding, anyone that isn't interested in skateboarding may find that really boring. So I try and make my themes as kind of like open as possible so that people can relate to them. And I knew that we could all relate to love and we could all relate to early relationships. So for about a process of a year, I did a project with a few different young couples. And the thing that I loved about it was how simple it was. Like how, when you're that age, like I was just reaching that point where I was beginning to enter relationships and go, oh, should I go out with this person? You know, are they gonna not provide for me, but is it gonna turn into a relationship? Is it worthwhile? Like, are they a decent person? And like when I was young, I just used to be like, are you fit? And that was it. And there was no like pretense, there was just no bullshit. It was just all about kind of my fun with that person. And I loved that with these young couples, and I loved how intense it was with them, and how I'd get calls at like 10 o'clock at night of boys crying, saying that Sammy broke up with them, and then he'd call me in the morning and he'd be like, oh, you know, we're gonna get married and she's the love of my life. And I loved this kind of roller coaster that I was going on with each of the couples, and kind of how intense each relationship was. And also how like you're at that point of transition where you're really forming your identity as a teenager. And often we embark on relationships just to kind of, I guess, lean on another person so that you don't have to do it alone. And it was quite nice to see them kind of have the same taste in music and kind of dress a bit similarly, or those kind of things. So yeah, that was that project. And then I left uni. And I remember the one thing that my tutor said to me as I left, he was like, don't stop taking pictures. Just, you know, keep taking pictures. And the reason I put a couple of these up is because I remembered it recently when I was kind of trying to come up with a project. And I was working on assignments, and I was like, I really should just do something for myself and kind of do something to remind me why I like photography. And I had like what I can only describe as writer's block, where I was like, need to do a project, need to come up with something really clever, and just couldn't. And then I had dinner with my friend, and he was just like, just go back to what you used to do. Just go out and just take pictures. So I guess like what happened from there is I started something that's been going on for about 3 years now, where it's not really a project, but I just go on walks, and I go on walks with people who I don't know very well, who I really want to get to know. And sometimes I go on my own, and I never know where I'm going. And I get to the station, and I close my eyes, and I press a button, and I get on a train, and I go there, and I have no idea where it is. And the agenda is to just walk for the day, and the best pictures are the ones that I don't take. So it's when I kind of, see something, or I see a frame, and I go, it's not worthy, I shouldn't shoot it. And it kind of reminds me why I'm a photographer, and how kind of like those images are there to be experienced sometimes, and sometimes are there to be captured. So for me, it's just a really good exercise and kind of keeps my passion alive. So I was just going to show you a little bit of a range about the kind of different work that I get to do. So editorially, that's what I do the most. And what I love about editorial is that I never know where I'm going to be from one day to the next, and I never know what challenges I'm going to be thrown. So I could be in a house photographing a family of 16 one day, and then I could be on a plane somewhere else the next day, which is really exciting. Or I could just not work for 3 months, which really sucks. But like this commission was really exciting for me, and what I like about editorial is it's really challenging. So this was a weekend that I spent in Norfolk, and I was photographing a woman who's deaf, dumb and blind. And it was about her emotional relationship with her father for the Saturday Telegraph. And it was about the fact that he couldn't actually communicate with her because he didn't know sign language, and the only thing that she understood was very close sign language. So I was really relieved because I spoke to her carers when I arrived, and they said, look, if Vicky doesn't like you or she doesn't want to be photographed, she'll just lamp you, like she'll just hit you, don't worry about it. So I was like, okay, fine, at least I know either way. And it was just really interesting because I got the opportunity to kind of really have to push the boundaries of how I connect with somebody. And it reminded me that a connection and forming a relationship with somebody isn't necessarily when the image occurs. Sometimes it's the before and afterwards. Sometimes it's the time that you spent, 2 weeks around their house every day. And sometimes it's kind of the time after the photograph when they relax and they open up more because of that connection. So that for me was just a really exciting commission. And then on the flip side of that, another burden is basically the fact that I get sent to some incredible places, but I am walking into people's lives and then I'm walking out again. And I was lucky enough to be sent to Ghana for the Weekend magazine, and it was an amazing story. It was a very, very crazy story on how a lot of the children out there in certain villages were being slaughtered by the flip of a chicken. So they would go to a witch doctor and their families would say, my daughter is a witch, and somebody would flip a chicken, and if the chicken lands one way, he kills the child, and if it lands the other way, the child is not a witch. So it was a really obscure story and really interesting and really important story. And I was absolutely honored to be going out there and doing it. But the problem was that I found is that I was going out there and then I was walking away. And anything that I took, anything that I shot was going to go out there as a presentation of what was occurring. And I think that's like the burden that we do bear as image makers, is that our voice is responsible. And it continues to frustrate me, and there's nothing I can do about it apart from try and connect with people, even if I only have 15 minutes with them, or if I only have one day with them. And also with assignments, what I've really learned is to be prepared. So this was a piece on an Essex prom, and it just really taught me to kind of go and be prepared for anything. And what I did is I really looked through the itinerary of the day, and I realized that there was not even 10 minutes spare where we had any break. So I set up a separate studio in a separate room in the hotel, and then halfway through dinner we went off and we did portraits of each of the pupils. Because for me it was about the dress, and it was about sort of certain characters of that. So I guess what I'm saying is editorial over the years, instead of running around like a headless chicken, it's kind of taught me to treat it like a game, so that you know what's going on, but it's also really exciting. And you're like, okay, the clock's on, we've got 1 hour, boom, 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 boom. Really exciting. And then this is an example of more commercial work that I did recently for Dove, which was a completely different way of working. I'm used to kind of going to somebody's house, rocking up and just seeing what it's about and interacting with somebody. And sometimes I guess it's just very real, very, very real. Whereas this was very much about being in a studio, having a team around you, having an art director, having a producer. So it's really, really different. And I really enjoy that kind of work. And I do it as much as I can because it teaches you so much about teamwork. It teaches you so much about kind of a different process of working. But it also taught me to kind of stick to what I know and never seize an opportunity to learn. So what I did is I spent 2 days playing around with so much different lighting and having a really good time. And then when it came to the shoot, I was like, right, put the lights away, put the blinds up, get out 6 reflectors, let's use natural light. So it's kind of like I knew that I was more comfortable doing that. And I knew that it would look really good doing it flash. That was absolutely fine, but it wasn't my thing. It wasn't what I was comfortable with. But I was so grateful that I had the opportunity to spend those 2 days learning that. So what I'd say is, if you're ever on a commercial shoot or production, try everything you can whilst you've got the opportunity, just like you have here. At the uni, you've got all the kit here. Do you know what I mean? Like, utilize it as much as you possibly can. I thought I'd just talk really, really quickly about tricky people, because it's a question that often comes up, is that what happens when you're photographing somebody who doesn't want to be photographed? And as my job, like, this comes up all the time. The majority of people don't want to be photographed and they can't be asked, or they're being photographed all day. So I guess there's 2 different avenues that I take on this. Number one is being ultra prepared. So with this shoot, it was for Dazed, a long, long time ago. And I needed to do a portrait, completely open brief, just a portrait of an artist who was an animator doing a display at the Design Museum. So I rocked up and he was just like, oh, just so insulting, like so insulting to me. Wouldn't give me the time of day. And I waited around for about 6 or 7 hours in the end for him. He was really not having it. But the idea that I had before I went was I'd looked into his research, I'd looked at all this research, looked at his drawing, and I was like, how cool would it be if he could draw, a face on a piece of glass and then stick it over himself and he becomes a piece of work. So luckily I bought a big sheet of glass with me, loads of markers and stuff, and then I managed to persuade him to do it. And it would have been a really different image had I not researched him, bought the glass before, made sure it was non-reflective, tested it out, come up with ideas. So I guess, like, with assignments now as well, I really try and just be prepared as I possibly can. And then the other extreme is when you rock up and somebody is just not having it. And I was warned before I met Mike Lee by all his PR team that he was going to be really hard work. They were like, he doesn't want to be shot today, he's not in the mood, you've got 10 minutes max. And I was like, okay, great, this is going to be fun. And it was in a really difficult location. It was in Soho, so it was just lunchtime, it was mega busy, it was pretty much, I was just like, oh, come on. And then it started raining. And I went in, I had an assistant with me, and he went straight up and kind of like shook my assistant's hand, and I was like, hello, I'm the photographer, I'm a girl. Where would you like to be shot? And he was just like, oh, just shoot me here. And I was like, okay, is there anywhere else we've got? And he was like, come on, you only need 1 shot, do it here, there's a light bulb there. And I just knew that it was like, oh man, this is gonna be really tough. So I was like, look, Mike, why don't you have a cup of coffee? Let's chill out. I know we've got 10 minutes, but I really want you to be comfortable. And he was like, no, let's do it here, let's do it now. And then I was like, look, is there anywhere that you want to be photographed, that you've been photographed before? And he was like, yeah, actually, there's a place down the road. And I was like, okay, cool, let's go there. So we walked out, and I just literally put my camera on my shoulder. And I wasn't thinking, I'm going to take a picture. How am I going to take a picture? I was just thinking, this guy needs to chill out, and I need to help him chill out. And all I did is I really tried to empathize, and I just said to him, I completely get it. If I was you, I would not want to have my picture taken. I understand why you find this boring. And then I just started talking to him about general stuff, and I started asking him about himself, and just really getting to know him as much as I possibly could in 10 minutes. And within 10 minutes, we were outside in the rain, and he was an absolute legend. He was the nicest guy. He was so sweet, so kind, so interesting, telling me all these different things about the area and the history of how long he'd been there. And then he turned to me at the end of the shoot, and he was kind of like, you know what, I really didn't want to do this to begin with, and I didn't really like you, but actually you're all right, and I really enjoyed it. And I was like, well, I thought you were a complete wanker, but actually you're a really nice guy. And it was really nice to have this kind of like, I was very lucky, it could have gone completely the other way. But what it taught me is that like, that's cool if people don't want to be photographed, because to be honest, like who would? And I think it's just about empathizing with people and understanding why they don't want to be photographed. So this is a different kind of project I did as well, because I also work with NGOs and charities. And I was lucky enough to be commissioned alongside 4 other photographers to do a project with Save the Children, which was a year-long project looking at poverty in the UK. And unfortunately, we were all allocated a family, unfortunately, I didn't get mine until the last 2 months, so it was a bit of a rush. And we all had different subtopics. So one person was doing massive families all living in one house. Another person was doing, I think, disabled families. And I was allocated a young teenage mum. So I photographed Ashley and her children. And she was 15 when she became pregnant. And she now has 3 children. So this one's called Knits. Remember Knits? And the reason I really enjoyed this assignment was because it really forced me to work outside my normal working methods. I'm used to constructing images and I'm used to kind of like having a certain element of control. Whereas with this, I literally just had to sit back and just observe and then shoot when I saw something. I'm just going to talk about a body of work that I did last year. And it was around the time that a lot of people had kind of stereotyped me into photographing young people. And then I started Googling, and I don't know how, but I came across young British naturists. And I was like, could be quite fun. So I got in touch with them, and for about a year, I basically met this group that were young British naturists that came together as strangers and all decided to get naked and hang out, basically. And I was like, okay, this is super weird. So I was like, why in Britain would you want to do that? It's bloody cold and you don't know them. So, and also I kind of thought if you're young, like that's quite unusual as well. I expected naturists to be a little bit older. So whilst I was going to these camps and getting to know them, the main question in the back of my head was why? Why? And it was really important for me to kind of like basically understand as much as I could about the people I was photographing. And after about a year and a half, I decided that I needed to step away from the group. And it was because I was kind of infringing on their leisure time. And not all of them wanted to be photographed. In fact, only a few of them did. And I still to this day won't be able to ever show those images to anyone. You know, they didn't consent to it because for me, I never kind of think of an outcome before I've done a project. I don't think, oh, this will make a book or this will make it an exhibition. It's kind of like, and I have no problem not showing those images. But for me, it was nice to be able to kind of not have that restriction. So after about a year and a half, I decided to get in touch with all the naturist camps around the UK and gain access. And then I got in touch with naturists all over the UK through forums, blogs, referrals, everything like that, just meeting them. And then I went to each of their homes and I photographed them at home naked. And then I organised trips over about a year where I brought these young people back together. So for 2 or 3 days or a week, and we stayed at these naturist sites. And they were all strangers coming together. And for me, I was just really curious to see what happened when people are naked and you engage with them and they're at that ultimate point of vulnerability. And I kind of just wondered, you know, the range of people that I was bringing to these clubs. You'd have, you know, a couple that were really, really sweet and had ducks and lived in Hove and so lovely. And then you had, you know, a guy that had just come out of prison. And then you've got some guy that was kind of like studying video games at uni. So you've got all these different people coming together and they just ultimately have no clues about each other's lives. The only shared interest is nudity. in a completely non-sexual way. And I kind of wondered how these people would engage. So when they were at home, I tried to photograph them doing something that was relevant to themselves or having something in the frame that was personal, so that it became less about their nudity and more about them. So for example, this is Jordan, and in his house, literally there is nothing but a mattress and an Xbox. So for him, I kind of knew what I was going to do. And the clubs really varied as well. So some of them had like an amazing bar and a kind of television screen, and some of them were literally just like a cabin in the middle of nowhere where the generator went off at 7 o'clock. And I guess like the reason that I did this project was because I wanted to challenge myself to shoot things that I wasn't comfortable with. So I knew that I'd have to shoot groups with this as well. And I was really bad at photographing more than one person. And I still find it really difficult photographing more than one person. But it's important for me with my projects to think about things I find super hard and then really attack them. So that over there is a thug, which is a mini 10 bat. And mini 10 is a naturist-only sport, and it's kind of like a combination between ping pong and tennis. Okay, so I was just going to talk about little projects that I do now and again as well, because I also sell projects to editorials as well as being commissioned by them. So, for example, this was a really fun project that I did last year, which you might have heard about. It's called chess boxing. And it's at the Scala kind of like every year and maybe twice a year, and it's a massive ring. So they have like 700 capacity in the audience or whatever. And they have 6 minutes of like really intensive boxing, and then a 1 minute break, and then a table's brought in, and they have 6 minutes of really intensive chess, and then a 1 minute break, and then 6 minutes of intensive boxing. And it keeps going until somebody either knocks the other person out or there's checkmate. So I was like, this is really cool. This would be great fun. So I shot all the documentary for it for two of the rounds, and I haven't got it on me, unfortunately. But I was in the ring whilst they were doing it, and it was really great, like getting somebody sort of with a bloody nose, you know, sweating onto a chessboard, and the crowd as well. Like there's screens with big kind of like chess sign, like of the chessboard, and when like somebody makes a move, the whole crowd are just like, ooh. It's really good. It's really good fun. So I did portraits in the Scala to go alongside that. And this was a recent commission by Time magazine. And like what's brilliant about kind of editorials is you do just get to go all over the place. You get to go to some incredible places, and you get to meet some incredible people. And then, like I was saying earlier, like I've just got so much to learn, and this is really difficult for me standing up here kind of talking about myself because it's a disgusting thing to do. But I guess what I'm saying is like I really enjoy playing and learning, and I do feel really blessed to be a photographer because it's endless. It's kind of like playing a musical instrument in a way that you can never ever learn everything, and there's no limit to it. I'm playing with multiple exposures, I'm learning new techniques. Like this at the moment, I'm playing with the idea of memory, and I'm constructing images as I go along, and then leaving my camera for a couple of months, and then remembering 5 of the shots that I've done on one exposure and trying to remember where I put what when I shoot the next thing. So I guess like I'm still at that stage at the moment where I'm just really experimenting, really learning, and really loving what I'm doing. And I'm very, very, very privileged to be doing what I'm doing, and I'm really lucky to be. And I think we all are. And the thing that I keep reminding myself of is how lucky I am to have something I'm passionate about. And I think when I was studying, what I really kind of realized when I finished was how that is a beautiful time in which you have all your focus on just being creative. And as soon as you leave uni and you go into that grey zone of like, shit, what the hell am I going to do in my life? You realise that those years at uni are so sacred for just playing and making all the mistakes that you can. And also realising that that never stops as well. Yeah. So that's it. So, I don't know what else to say, but thank you very much for having me. And I really would love it if you asked some questions, because you guys have been so quiet. You're like the quietest people I have ever spoken to. I kind of feel like, I don't know, I'm just talking rubbish. So. Go for it.
You said you were coming up with ideas or selling work that you've done to editorials, as well as getting commissions. What kind of stuff do you come up with an idea for
So you said, like, what kind of ideas do I come up with to get commissioned or to sell to editorials? So the chess boxing one, for example, I shot that and then I contact all the editorials and say, does this interest you in any way? But I try to keep a little bit of a separation between the long-term projects and my editorial pitching, because a lot of the time when you're working on something that's really personal, if you're working on it for 4 or 5 years, it's a bit heartbreaking to just hand it over to a magazine and get it published for like 50 quid, do you know what I mean? Or you know what I mean? It's kind of, it's not why I make that work. The reason I make it is to learn, so yeah. Yeah. So you said, how do you, sorry, I'm having to repeat every question, it's not because I'm deaf. You said, how do you distance yourself emotionally when you're working in a photojournalist manner, and there's kind of an emotional moment. Yeah, like, it's really weird you say that, because my friend Dominic, he's with Magnum, he's a war correspondent, and I remember like the first time I got to know him, we went to the pub, and we were just sitting in the pub in the middle of the day at Oxford Street, and we were just chatting, and I was like, oh, I haven't seen you for a few days, what have you been up to? And he was just like, oh yeah, I was in the Congo last week. And I was like, oh, okay, wow. I was like, dude, we're in a pub right now, like, are you okay? Because he was telling me stories of like walking into houses and seeing, you know, whole families slaughtered and women raped and all this thing, and I was like, how do you go from that to sitting in a pub in Soho? And I'm not on the front line, and I'm not in stuff that is incredibly shocking, but I have, through work like going to Ghana and Sudan and kind of all those different places, I have been, especially working with charities, seen things that are really hard to swallow. And I guess there's always going to be that moral dilemma. There's always going to be that Kevin Carter moment where you're kind of like, am I taking the picture in a selfish way, or am I taking this picture to deliver a message? And I guess the only thing that I can do is take ownership for that and say, when I take that image, that is my fault, that is my responsibility, and I need to know that I'm doing it for the right reason. And the only way to kind of like walk away from a situation and not detach yourself emotionally, but to feel better about it than if you don't, is, I guess, to treat those people with as much respect as you possibly can and speak to them and find out their story. And what shocked me and what kind of like, yeah, surprised me the most was the fact that a lot of people were really grateful. A lot of people were like, thank you for being here and delivering this message. But they're like, sometimes the things that you kind of can't walk away from is actually the more complex relationships, like actually working with young people. It's like really, really complex, because I'm an adult. And when I'm amongst kind of young people, I know that I'm going to form an impression on them. So you have to be really aware of your own behavior. And that's even harder for me, because I kind of just want to be myself. And yeah, so it's a constant battle. I think it's just about awareness and putting yourself in a situation where you're not out of your depth. Like, I know that I couldn't go on the front line, because I've heard stories of Tim Hetherington, and I'm just like, wow, I am just not that brave. Like, I wish I was so much, and those kind of people are just way up there for me. Like, they hugely inspire me, but, you know, I saw this amazing documentary by Tim Hetherington, and I was just like, wow, the guy is incredible. And then I felt really empowered, and I was like, I can do this. And then I was walking down the street, and I freaked out because I saw a dead pigeon. And I was like, no way, could I be in a war zone? Do you know what I mean? Because I just know that I would I would have a panic attack. I would just go crazy. But I would like to. And I think that there are other ways of challenging yourself. So, yeah. Go for it. Oh, sorry. Say one more time. Yeah. No, that's actually, you said the Save the Children, her face wasn't shown. No, there's actually a wider edit. Yeah, there's some kind of very full-on portraits there. But I often have to not identify people in the portrait, which is really hard. I was very fortunate. So your question was about, I think, if I heard it correctly, was it about the fact that shooting overseas, did I get commissioned to go over there, or did I Sorry? Journalistic stuff? Yeah. So I was actually sent out to Sudan. So I was lucky, Oxfam approached me and they said, we really like the way that you shoot, we want you to do a project with us, where do you want to go? And then we came up with the idea to go to Sudan. So it's kind of harder when you want to go somewhere, because then they're like, okay, why? And I have done things in the past where I've just gone to a place and got it funded through a story that I wasn't so passionate about, and it's taught me that actually what I'd rather do is self-fund that work, because then you don't have a responsibility to somebody. So, yeah. But there's great things at the moment, I'm not part of them, but things like Kickstarter and stuff like that are good. So, yeah. How did I first start making money? When I was 13, I had a paper round in photography. I don't. I mean, I'll be honest with you, and I'm not just saying this, like, with the work that I do, it's never been about the money for me. Look, I'm not going to lie, it'd be lovely if I got paid, like, shed loads of money for doing what I do. And sometimes I can't believe that people are paying me to do what I do. But I think that, like, there are certain avenues that I could have taken that would have been much more financially rewarding. And there are things that I still shoot now that I'm not as passionate about, like weddings and things like that. But I do them because they do pay money, and then I can go and I can buy 20 rolls of Kodak. So for me, it's a really personal thing, and every photographer works differently. I don't think there's a way to do it. There's not like, okay, right, well, I'm just going to sell prints and I'm going to earn money off that, because that's kind of a dream world. You know, and then there's kind of like, well, if I'm going to be a fashion photographer, I just go down that route, or if I'm going to do advertising, I just go down that route. So ideally, how I'd like to earn money would be doing more commercial and advertising stuff, because I love working in a team and it's great fun and you get to learn loads, and yeah, it's really creative. And continuing doing my editorial work, which doesn't pay very well, but it is really exciting. Say again? Yeah, so I don't have a gallery, but my work, I hope, kind of lends itself to that a little bit more. So I do exhibit and I do kind of like publish, and I'm part of group shows, and I've done a few solo shows. So I try and do a little bit of that just because I really like that world, and it's something that I've grown up with and I really respect. But I'm also aware that my work is quite infant, and it's kind of like, you know, I've got a lot to learn, and I kind of have this thing where I don't really like looking at my work, so it's really hard to kind of, do you know what I mean? You kind of want it to just get better and better. But yeah, I remember a few years ago, actually, it's funny you say this, because I was halfway like coming out of uni, and I remember when I first came out of uni, it was like that grey zone of like, whoa, crazy. And then my friend Gareth, who's a photojournalist, was saying that, I said, how do you earn your money? And he basically splits his life into labour and photography. So he does like a load of labouring, works his arse off, and then goes out and shoots. And I was like, cool, man, like, I so could not do that. And I just, like, because I'm not passionate about labouring, and I remember being at uni and working in a pub till silly hours, but I just thought, you know what, like, I'm just going to try it. I'm just going to shoot anything I can. And And I kind of felt like as long as I've got a camera, I'm kind of happy with what I'm doing. So it's not all fun and games, obviously. I'm obviously shooting things I don't want to shoot all the time, but I'm lucky and I'm not financially driven, so buy me a drink. Anyone else? Come on, don't be so shy.
You said you bought 20 rolls of Kodak, or wanted to buy 20 rolls of Kodak. So do you shoot more film?
Yeah.
Do you shoot both digital and film alongside?
I shoot digital because of the turnarounds. And I think also, like, I'd agree with Annie Leibovitz. Low light, digital wins. Like, it just does, unless you want that grain. But I love shooting film. So, and it's just, for me, it's about the working method. It's about the fact that, I kind of described it earlier because somebody asked the same question. I basically said it's kind of like, with digital, I feel like somebody's just thrown me a shed load of money and I'm going to walk into a shop and I'm like, meh, 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 and I'm spending it and I'm enjoying it. But then it's kind of digital, like film for me is if somebody just gives me like £50 and they go, right, there's your money. And I kind of spend it more wisely and enjoy it more and spend it differently. Yeah. Grill me, I dare you. Yay! Should we just go down the pub? Like, yeah?
Art director of Dove.
Yeah.
Who was the art director?
I don't know, because it was a PR agency.
Okay.
So yeah. But I like art directors a lot. I really like, okay, I've only had one bad instance. Because like, I think the problem is that what I learned really quickly when I left uni is that if you're working commercially, people come from such a different world, and it's kind of like the equivalent of like a banker walking up to you and expecting you to know everything about accounting. And I think that I learned that I can't expect clients to understand art and photography. And I remember like somebody ringing me up once and going, hey, so we need a picture of a building. Do you have a camera that takes pictures of buildings? And I was like, well, let me just check, hang on. And I kind of like, that really made me realize like, wow, you know, like I need to kind of be aware of this. And what really gets frustrating is when you're on a shoot and there's almost like a battle between you and that person because they're going, let's make it random. Let's have them holding a stick. And you're like, that's so relevant to everything we're doing right now. What are you talking about? And they're like, let's get creative. And that's really hard for you to kind of be like, no, it's not working, no. So I think for me, it's about that balance of kind of like me understanding where they're coming from and not just, you know, like brown nosing and going, yep, whatever you want me to do. Because when I hope this is kind of relevant to you, but when you leave uni, you obviously have to put together a portfolio. And like, I really can't stress this enough. When you leave uni, please don't put together a portfolio that just does the job. Because the worst thing is to go to a creative director or an editor and give them a picture of a black dog because they want a picture of a black dog and you can photograph a black dog, so therefore they're going to hire you. And if that's what you want to do and you want to earn loads of money by getting lots of work, that's completely up to you. But for me, I would much rather sort of show them a picture of something completely random that was really personal to me that I could talk about or that I really enjoyed, and for them to commission me for something different and say, you know what, like I really like the way you thought about that or you did that, and why don't we work together on this? So I guess it's two kind of, and when I left uni, I was offered two really separate pieces of advice because I was called into a couple of agencies and half of them were like, you need to go out and you need to shoot pictures of people running in the rain and you need to shoot this. And then other people were just like, you're clearly enjoying this, just carry on, just keep doing what you're doing, it's fine. And I kind of went with that because I was like, well, we obviously like get each other here. And I have more fun doing this than running around shooting stuff that I don't want to photograph. So that was a bit of a tangent. Sorry about that. I used to have an agent. I used to have a commercial agent. I was part of the Futures program with LPA, and then they asked me to stay on, and I kind of decided not to. I wanted to just be freelance for a while. And now I'm actually rethinking that. I'm thinking maybe I should look at a commercial agent, because I think I was in a place at that time where I just didn't really want to go on that avenue as much as I do now. So, and it has to feel right. And I've seen a lot of agents and some of them just don't feel right. But it is really difficult, like finding a connection. Yeah, so the way that an agent works is it's really different with an agency like Getty or someone like that and an agent because they all kind of represent different parts. So it depends on the kind of photography that you do. So if, for example, you were doing fashion, editorial and commercial, you'd have a more commercial agent. And what would happen is they would take 30% or 50% or however much of any jobs that came in your way, and they would do all the accounting, all the managing, all the organising. They'd sort out your visas and flights if you needed them, and your accommodation and your studio hire and your equipment hire and blah, 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 blah. And they'd also make sure you got paid a little bit extra. But the catch is that also any work you get in, you have to hand over to them, and they take 30% or 50% of that. So it's kind of a little bit of a like, well, how much am I going to hand over? And then the other side is stock imagery, which is basically when you're syndicating your images. So when you take a picture, say I take a picture of, I don't know, Im Kellen, whatever, and I know that that image would probably want to be bought again. Instead of people contacting me individually, there's a wide database that I'm part of, and then they will sell my images, and they'll take 50% of whatever comes from that. So there's two very different kinds of agencies. And if you're a documentary photographer, there's things like Getty Reportage that kind of sit in the middle of the two. So they'll go and get you work and commercial work, and they'll also sell your images as well. But what I'd recommend is when you get with an agent, go, it's my client list. You're not touching them. They're my babies. And a lot of them will be like, not at all. So yeah, it's weighing it up. Yeah, there's loads of great agencies. I'd recommend Weber, East. I don't know if Burnham Nika is still going. Wyatt Clark, really, really good guys. I really like those guys. I'm trying to think who else. Best thing to do is probably to head on the AOP website. Just look at a big fat list of them. Thanks for having me.